Hello, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar on Getting Solar Right, Borrowing from the Best. I'm Lucy Carew-Reid, Senior Project Manager at Ironbark Sustainability, and I will be facilitating today. So we have presenters from Ironbark, Moonee Valley and Canterbury Bankstown presenting on procuring, commissioning and monitoring solar. First of all, a couple of apologies from Emma Chessel, Ironbark Solar Expert, and Peter Vuno-Karingbai. They've been called away, one on a solar project in Alice Springs and Peter for other reasons. So Paul Brown from Ironbark and Anne Fitzsimmons from Canterbury Bankstown will be presenting in their stead. Before I hand over to Paul, I just want to make a quick remark on the renewable energy target. It is reaching its 2020 target, and it's currently uncertain what future energy policy will mean for renewable energy projects. But the RET will continue to provide upfront discounts for small systems after 2020. However, under the current policy, they'll be awarded small-scale technology certificates at a diminishing rate. So you can see this table outlines an example 6 kilowatt project. And you can see that each year the STCs will diminish until they fizzle out completely in 2030. So in 2018, if you were to install a 6 kilowatt system, you would get some upfront payment of nearly $3,500. Whereas by 2025, you would only get $1,500 worth of STCs until 2030, where you'd only get $265. Now, in terms of large-scale project certificates, they're granted as a system operates, and there's already a competition between proposed projects for the remaining volume of LGCs. So in terms of large scale, the boom of construction in the next 2 years is likely to provide opportunities for councils regardless of the RET or without. So it's just a matter of watching that space for large scale solar, but certainly for small scale solar, paybacks without STCs are under 10 years, so it's still a good business case, regardless of when you do these. However, it does make sense to get going and install your solar now while there's still some STCs around. Okay, so on to Paul Brown, Managing Director of Ironbark Sustainability. He'll be imparting both his own experience of solar, rooftop solar projects, and that of our solar expert, Emma Chessel, using Macedon Ranges Shire Council project as an example. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Lucy, and hi, everyone. I'll be talking today a high-level overview about the project management of solar. Apologies from Emma Chessel, who's Ironbark's renewable energy expert, but she has given me some slides and gone through the detail of project management. Before we get into that, it's useful to talk a little bit about expertise. So this pie chart shows you what we discovered in a webinar we did a couple of months ago on the people who were attending. It showed that around about 10% of people attending had delivered around 20 solar projects or more. 28% were 10 to 20, about another third was less than 10, and then a third of all attendees had not delivered the projects to the same level as the rest. What this tells you is there's a high level of variance in expertise, and this should really drive how you deliver projects. Where you don't have large experience, gain experience, but use others to support you. Where you have lots of experience, I'm sure you know already where you're going to use external support for the project management of these projects. They're reasonably straightforward, but there are some tricks. Okay, so to frame this, we have 5-step process for delivering projects. This is pretty standard for project management, and we use this same 5-step process for all sorts of different projects, from running a conference to delivering a large-scale streetlight change. For the purpose of solar, I'm going to step through each step for you, and also use a real-life example of Macedon Ranges Shire and exactly where they engaged Ironbark to support them in these 5 steps. Macedon are a council who have some good experience in solar, and especially in project management. So they really cherry-picked support for the areas where they wanted it. All right. So the define stage is it's a very high-level question. What is the overall scope of the project? For standard solar projects, this could be driven by things like the whole of council strategy or a community strategy around renewable energy, greenhouse reduction, cost reduction, etc. There may be targets that council has to deliver a certain number of energy systems or to reduce a certain amount of greenhouse gases. Some councils, for example, have a policy where if a project has a 10-year payback, they will automatically fund it. So obviously that will help define the overall scope of a project. This is also a good time to do high-level feasibility and site identification. So which sites do you want to target for the remainder of the project? For the purpose of Macedon, they engaged Ironbark to develop a greenhouse reduction plan, which is essentially a whole of council plan around greenhouse reductions, and then also a targeted PV strategy. So where are we going to do PV and what is the scale of PV to address our reduction pathways plan? That did include a couple of high-level desktop feasibilities on large-scale ground-mounted solar. All right, funding. There's a few funding avenues available to solar currently, and we're talking March 2018. By far, the vast majority of funding comes from capital funding from council. Also, the federal government renewable energy target still delivers LGCs or STCs, depending on the size of your project. And that is around about a third of project funding. So almost all solar projects now also access that federal government program for funding. Power purchase agreement is another common funding source, and it is essentially where the providers provide the upfront capital and then maintain the asset over 10 or 15 years, or any period you want to negotiate with them. And essentially they're the one providing the capital through finance. For Macedon, they had a combination of capital funding and STCs, and this is, again, the most common method of funding for solar. The preparation stage is getting into things like communications and project planning. So when is it going to be delivered? Who's responsible for what? How are we going to communicate this both to the site users, but also to the external community? And then also looking at detailed feasibility usually for larger systems, but often councils will do it for all systems that they're focusing on, so that they know the scope, a more detailed scope of exactly what it is they're going to deliver. For Macedon, they did a desktop feasibility for all sites. They had some old feasibility studies completed in 2015, and there were 6 additional sites or sites that needed further assessment prior to delivery of this project. They also looked at feasibility of battery storage. Now, for most solar projects these days, battery storage is one of those ones where asking the question, does it make sense, will be a continual question for the next 6, 12, 24 months. It is expected, and I was going to say known, but you never know what happens in the future, but it is expected that within that time period, battery storage will be a very good financial option to add to solar projects, which will enable you to put more solar on the roof, reduce more greenhouse emissions, and reduce more cost. Right at the moment, battery storage is still reasonably expensive, but is dropping all the time. And so for most large-scale projects, just before you implement, checking whether it's time to do battery storage is definitely the right approach. And then in 3-5 years' time, it will just be standard. The procurement stage. Okay, so this is really about specifications, working through a procurement process, evaluation contracting. This is a very standard process and standard for all types of projects. For Macedon, all they wanted was a quick check of the tender documentation, all of the procurement documentation, and particularly the specifications to make sure it was appropriate. Specifications are the area where any changes in technology or systems or processes will be picked up in that specification stage. So it can be helpful definitely to have specifications checked, once a year or so, depending on how frequently you're doing solar. But it's one of those ones, getting external support or advice on that can be helpful to bring in the newest things. All right, the last step is managing and evaluating. And to some extent, this is reasonably straightforward. Project management, time, cost, quality. Importantly, looking at commissioning, so independent commissioning to check that what the installers did is A, online, so it's operating properly, B, safe and to standards, and C, that there's no issues with the installation for the site users. Also looking at overall evaluation, what worked, what didn't, what can we do next time, reporting, and then working towards maintenance. With solar systems, maintenance is something important to consider. It can be included in contracts like cleaning contracts, or you can get specialist solar maintainers to come periodically to clean and make sure the system's working properly. For Macedon, they delivered the vast majority of the project management themselves in-house. As I mentioned, they have very good project management expertise. So what they wanted support for was that post-installation quality assurance and site inspections. So were the installations installed effectively, properly, and are there any issues to rectify before we sign off on practical completion? And also evaluation reporting. So we checked these with Macedon before putting these on the slide, but what were their learnings for using external support? And it really correlates to the time, cost, and quality. Obviously, when using external support, you're aiming to utilise your time effectively by engaging external contractors, and you're aiming to improve quality. That comes at the balance of spending extra money for the projects. What Macedon said was most important was making sure that that process is obviously tailored to their expertise and their skill, and included plenty of opportunities for them to capacity build and then them to improve their internal knowledge. So for example, when doing the commissioning phase after the project was completed, their project manager attended 3 of the commissioning installations to learn what it is that you look at and what it is you assess. Okay, across to you, Lucy, or to Harry rather.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Paul. We'll move straight on to Harry Fricke from City of Moonee Valley. Harry Fricke has installed over 2,000 panels at council facilities, and last year he featured in a separate webinar on small and large-scale solar, where he profiled Moonee Valley's maintenance regime in some detail, and also shared some key learnings on project management, and outlined some avenues he's exploring given he's running out of council roof space, such as solar on other people's rooftops. Harry's combination of solid technical knowledge, his engineering approach, and wealth of project experience make him the ideal person to go to on solar and other greenhouse gas projects. Today he's going to talk us through his learnings on tender specifications, judging solar tenders, council internal approvals process, and the importance of commissioning. There's going to be plenty of time for questions, and Harry has offered to provide his contact details so you can get in touch with him after. So thanks very much, Harry.
Thanks very much, Lucy, for that intro. Yes, well, Lucy's given that's a very strong intro there for me. I think we haven't done everything brilliantly. We've learned a lot on the way, so hopefully people out there can learn from our experiences. So I'll talk about solar power procurement today and Moonee Valley's experience. All right, so in 2015, Me Valley ran a public tender for solar contractors for solar installs. We got a 3-year contract. It's about to expire. We signed with 3 suppliers. And during the term of this contract so far, we've installed about 20 systems and 500 kilowatts. So initially we used all 3 contractors to test them out, and also we had a lot of installs to do, so it was handy to have several contractors. We found one is particularly competitive on the smaller installs. One of them was more competitive on larger installs. And one of them we had some really good experience with initially, but and a lot of the installs went quite well. But 2 of the installs that they did, we had some significant quality issues, and we haven't done further work with them since then. So I would recommend having a good panel of contractors. It was suggested to me by one of our building maintenance team that we have 3 contractors, and I thought that was a bit much initially, but it's turned out to be good advice. And contractors also, some of them are busy at different times, and if you've got several, you can shift to others. So I'll just quickly go through some of the solar that we've had installed under the current contract. This is one of our library and gym facilities. We have 80 kilowatts installed there. Our civic centre, there's 100 kilowatts on the civic centre and 20 on a neighbourhood centre to the north. 30 kilowatts on a kinder and community hall. Another 30 kilowatts on a sports pavilion and community space. Another 30 kilowatts on a community building and a sports pavilion. About 20 kilowatts, a little bit over, on a kindergarten children's centre. 5 kilowatts on a small kinder. Our youth services building, quite an elegant install with an east-west facing roof. And a children's centre on the right. Another community hall on the left and a kinder on the right. Another kinder with quite a difficult roof. And our depot and waste transfer station, there's 80 kilowatts there. And the most recent install, the installer sent a little drone up to take a photo of this one when they were finished. Quite an elegant install on a northwest facing bit of roof. So that's just some examples of what we've done. So the tendering part, which is what I was going to discuss mostly today, there are many ways to run a tender for whatever you want to buy, including solar. And I'm just going to show you the way we did ours, and it's not necessarily the best way to do it, but it worked well for us. So in our tender, we gave an example of a big roof, and it's a fairly flat roof. I think it's got a 2 or 3 degree slope on it, and it's a 2-story building. So it's big and it's flat and it's pretty easy for solar. And we said we have a budget of $100,000 for this, for an install on this building, and show us what you can do. So I picked this roof area and the price partly because roof area wasn't going to be a constraint. They would easily fit $100,000 worth of solar on this roof. They wouldn't be scrambling for roof space. So that would make comparing the quotes that came back more easy. And we fixed the price, so that had been removed. That variable's been removed from the comparison. Now, fixing the price might sound a bit odd, but we knew what our budget was, and or roughly, and so we thought we would work to that. Fixing the price meant that they would use only the easy areas of the roof, so they weren't going to be unlikely to be quoting on micro inverters, on putting panels in difficult locations. It was all going to be fairly straightforward install. and that would make comparison easier. We fixed the price at $100,000 because I didn't want quotes coming back for systems under 30 kilowatts. I wanted larger systems. Now, this might be particular to our distributor, but systems over 30 kilowatts in the Gemina distribution area need pre-approval. They need significant extra electrical engineering work. There's double network protection equipment. There's extra testing and certification requirements. So we really wanted quotes to come back over 30 kilowatts. If I didn't fix the price, I think quite possibly a number of installers would quote under 30 kilowatts, which is legitimate, but we wanted contractors who had experience with large-scale systems. And so I think fixing the price to $100,000 to some extent ensured that. We didn't expect any quotes to come back with microinverters. I wanted all the quotes to come back with string inverters just for ease of comparison. So because it's a big, flat, easy roof with no shading issues, and there wouldn't be any push for the installers to quote panels in partially shaded areas, say around plant rooms, that might benefit from DC optimizers or microinverters. And we didn't get any quotes with microinverters or DC optimizers. So that made comparison of the quotes easier again. So the main variables remaining in the responses from the tenderers were the size of the proposed system. So as you may well be aware, that solar is a really scalable product. We fixed the price. Obviously, you wouldn't fix the price if you were tendering for footpath works or something like that. But in fixing the price for solar, that meant that providers who had better value for money could provide a larger solar system. We looked at the staff that were allocated to the project and their qualifications and their experience. We looked at the quality of the components and quality of install. And we looked at the corporate, social and environmental responsibility of the tenderers. So our tender evaluation spreadsheet looked like this. This is a bit indicative. It's roughly what we used. So we have price in terms of dollars per kilowatt hour generated over 10 years. A slightly unusual unit, but that's what I used. So we asked each tenderer to quote the system, show us the size and the panel layout and so on, and also estimate the annual generation, which I did check and pulled a couple of them up on. I think there was some overestimates there, and they acknowledged either errors or somewhat overestimating. We looked at the compliance with the specifications of the tender. So in some cases, tenderers didn't quote up to $100,000, like well below it. I'm not sure whether that's because they felt they weren't capable of producing a system that large. Some of them didn't produce a roof layout, which I really needed, and so on. System warranties, we looked at the warranties provided. Well, the panel warranty is fixed. Industry standard is 25 years. That's, I believe, a requirement. We looked at the inverter warranties, which typically are 5 years, but often for bigger systems, I think they bumped that up to 10. We looked at the warranties on the racking system and the installation workmanship warranty. So there were 4 warranties that we looked at there. And you can see in this part of the screen here, I think you can see my cursor. I've got the warranties noted for each of those 4 components. So obviously we've scored accordingly, and a lot of the suppliers didn't provide, didn't explicitly state a workmanship warranty or racking warranties. Usually panels and inverters were specified though. We looked at the what we called the performance guarantee. It was basically whether there was any extra testing above and beyond minimum industry standards for the panels and the inverters, whether there was any extra sort of endorsement of the components. One of the things that we looked at was scorecard for the panels, and also whether the panels had positive quality endorsement from the Solar Council of Australia. At the time, the Solar Council of Australia had endorsed several panel manufacturers for their quality of their product and their social and environmental corporate sustainability. We looked at supplier experience and performance, which was really important to us. We wanted a really good quality product, and in order to get that good quality, what we found is good quality components are good quality when they come off the production line, but if you have a poor quality install, that renders good quality products poor quality. Unfortunately, if they're installed badly, they won't perform. So that was really important to us. We wanted a supplier with experience of installing big systems and doing a good job. And we looked at the supplier's staff resources, how many staff they have, their qualifications and so on. And we looked at their corporate social and environmental responsibility. That was an interesting one. A lot of suppliers came back and, sort of scratching their head a little bit about this one and saying, well, we install solar power, that's fantastic for the environment, isn't it? And they're right, but what we wanted to also see is that they're running their business in a sustainable way and an ethical way. And some of them really got it, had fabulous stories to tell about their sustainability credentials, whether it was encouraging staff to use public transport, providing parking for bicycles and so on, or car sharing, carpooling, and sourcing goods locally as much as they possibly could, and panels, for example, with good social responsibility, manufactured by organisations that had good social responsibility, so whole supply chain sustainability. Others, one of the responses really amused me. I think their corporate sustainability consisted of something along the lines of there was a recycling bin next to the desk of one of their staff. So they obviously didn't quite get it. And perhaps of interest to the audience is that we didn't weight any of the criteria over 20%, and that included the price, which really surprised our procurement team. And they seriously questioned that and asked me if I, well, they said they weren't happy about that. And I said, well, I'm in charge of this and that's what I want. What I found is if you weight the price around 50% or greater, the price ends up dominating the result, and the lowest price will almost certainly win the tender. And the quality of the staff and their qualifications and their experience and all of those other, the warranties and so on, become almost negligible in comparison to price. So it becomes a totally price-driven decision. And solar is a long-term investment. And I think sustainability, people understand that sustainability is a long-term thing. And I really didn't want to judge the outcome on the upfront purchase price. So I didn't want that to be a really major factor. And we got a good outcome, and a lot of the three contractors who did end up being awarded the contract were strong on price, and they were strong across the board in terms of they had good, well-qualified staff, they had lots of experience of larger installs, they had good corporate sustainability, they had competitive pricing. So I think it was a good outcome. So we had our top 3 tenderers and we signed contracts with them, and we had a winning submission for the Civic Centre. We took the tenderer with the highest score overall, and we awarded them the install for the Civic Centre, which is what we'd asked them to quote on in the tender. And the $100,000 did easily fit on the roof, and we awarded the tender and then said, that's great. Now our budget is greater than that. Show us what you can do for this higher budget and fill up the roof if you can, and which they did. I said install started immediately, but there was a bit of negotiation with our building maintenance team about moving walkways and roof barriers and so on, and then our OT&S team about where the team could work from in the car park and so on, but that was overcome pretty swiftly, and we went ahead. So the tender wording, there's obviously a lot of wording in tenders, a lot of standard wording around no canvassing of councillors and clarifications of quotes and all of that sort of business, which takes up pages and pages. And then usually if your tenders are similar to ours, there's the guts of it, which is what you actually want, which is the specifications of the solar power systems, which usually runs to a few pages. And I'm happy to share this with people if they want to contact me directly. I can share our specification wording. We borrowed some of the wording from some of our colleagues in neighbouring councils. So yeah, happy to share. So some of the tender wording that we found useful and ended up having to lean on from time to time to get our contractors to finish jobs as we wanted them done. So all works conducted by successful contractors are expected to meet renewable energy and building industry best practice. That has been handy in some cases where we felt that the works weren't up to best practice. So all of the components should meet all of the relevant Australian standards and Clean Energy Council requirements and guidelines. Bit of a cover-all statement, but I think useful to have in there. This is an important one, I think, and actually the title of our tender was Supply, Install and Commissioning of Solar Power. And the reason that the and commissioning is an important component to include. The reason for that is that some of our installers before 2015 had installed the panels and the inverters and connected it all up, but not got connection approval from the distribution company and had not actually finalised commissioning, had said, well, there's your panels and your inverter, and walked away. And quite some time later, we realised that the system wasn't switched on and hadn't had all of its certification done, and now was actually out of date, wasn't up to the current standards. And in order to get it connected, and we would have to do some extra work, electrical work, to get it up to the current standards. So that was very annoying. So we've included that the contractor will manage the project from procurement of the components and installation through to final system commissioning, including connection to the electricity grid. This includes organising all necessary interactions with council's electricity retailer and distributor. I would include that always in any contract for solar. And this is a difficult part for a lot of the solar contractors. It's paperwork. The retailers and distributors are often slow to respond and difficult to deal with. But this really needs to be part of the installer's job. I think it's critical, and they need to be held to account and to finish it off. So submissions should allow for costs of works during out of hours time as may be necessary. We did have to lean on this at one stage when we got quotes for a library, and we compared the quotes and we said we awarded the job to one of our contractors, who then went on site, and the library said, oh, you're making too much noise, you can't do this now. And our contractor asked for extra pay for work out of hours. And we did come to an agreement, but we did say, look, it's in your contract. You should have allowed for that in your original quote. You knew it was a library. They're going to be noise sensitive. You were probably going to have to work out of hours, and we assumed all of our contractors quoted accordingly. So the systems need to be designed to allow reasonable access to all building services and roof areas, including gutters for cleaning and maintenance. There is a tendency amongst the solar installers to install where it's easy for them and not necessarily leave enough space to make it easy for everybody else to work around the solar system. And I think that's a bad outcome, because your staff at council, if your solar installers do this and install panels over gutters and too close to air conditioners to allow maintenance, you're going to get it. That solar is going to get a bad reputation, and it's going to make life hard for you when you go to install more systems. And I would work with all your building maintenance team carefully and work out layouts, solar panel layouts with them. Get the solar installer to provide a layout diagram, show it to your building maintenance team, get their sign off. Solar systems to in no way compromise structural integrity, durability, or weather protection of the building. We have had roof leaks after some of the installs. Whether it was the installer's fault or not, we've said, you were the last on the roof, it's now leaking, come and fix it, and they have. I didn't include this requirement. I think I sent it as a clarification after the tender was issued, but I wouldn't have any panels mounted flat. After one experience, we saw how dirty they got. Obviously, from what I'd seen, the panels had puddles on them. They were so flat, and then the puddles had dried, leaving dust caked on them. They looked like sort of salt lakes, dried salt lakes. It was disastrous. So 15 degrees minimum, I suggest, allows a bit of self-cleaning in the rain. They still need to be cleaned at least once a year, I would recommend, but 15-degree tilt gives them some self-cleaning. So payment, we pay up to 80% of the total price once the solar panels are installed and the inverters installed and all the wiring's complete. And then we hold on to that 20% until we've got a certificate of electrical safety accepted by the distributor, the system switched on and everything's functioning well. And we get I have a contractor who is independent, who comes along and does a check for us. He's an experienced solar installer himself, but he's not aligned with any of our contractors, so he comes in and checks their work. And sometimes we have had to have the solar installers come back, do some extra work, bring the systems up to acceptable levels of standard of workmanship, and then we'll pay the remaining 20%. We did try holding on to 10%. It seemed in some cases that wasn't enough to get the system fully to the stage that we were happy with. So I'd recommend holding on to 20% retainer. That's it from me, unless you have any questions, and please feel free to email me, get in touch if you'd like some more information. I'm happy to share. People have shared their information with me, so if I can be of help, I'd be glad to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry, and thank you once again for your time. I do have a couple of questions. I'll be quick because I know we do need to move on. So in terms of getting a panel of installers, how many projects warrant getting a panel of installers? And did you have to almost guarantee or indicate to those when you went out for tender that there was going to be regular work, and for how many years?
Well, we have a requirement in the Local Government Act, I believe, and I'm not a procurement specialist, but if you're going to spend over $150,000 on any one project, or I think it's over $500,000 with any one contract over, I think it's a 5-year period, you're obliged to go to a public tender. So we thought we would make sure that we met that requirement, go into a public tender. So there's that requirement.
Okay, so you had the centre in mind, and so you thought, yeah, we're doing a big project, and then why not just get a panel of installers that you can then use on future projects? Is that right?
Well, that's right, yeah. Well, we knew we wanted to do multiple installs over multiple years, and we were going to have a budget of potentially around $600,000, maybe $700,000. That might potentially go mainly to one contractor, therefore we would be obliged to do a public tender in order to ensure that. It's not too much extra work to do a public tender versus a good request for quote. And it just gives us that flexibility. If we were awarded extra funds to do more solar installs, we would have that flexibility to do more if we'd done a public tender. There's in the public tender documentation that we have, and I think it would probably be standard across most local governments, it does say that even if you're a winning contractor, council's not obliged to award you any of the work. It's totally at our discretion. So we really are in control of how much we award. We don't guarantee how much we're going to award or that we're going to award any. So that the tenderers should understand, if they've read the documentation, that it's no guarantee, even if they get on the vendor panel, that they will be awarded work.
Great, well, thank you.
They have to remain competitive too. So if they submit high prices, once they're on the panel, they may not get any work.
Okay, thank you. Now I have two very, very quick questions. One from Wagga, are you specifying what panels and inverters you want? Because when she goes out asking for quotes for, say, a 10 kilowatt system and just specifies tier 1, she gets 3 completely different responses, you know, mono versus poly, totally different brands of panels and inverters, and finds it hard to compare. So you did mention a PDF document that helps with that, which I will share as part of the webinar. But do you have any comment on that?
I don't think it would be. It seems to me, just off the top of my head, a bit anti-competitive to specify inverters and panels, like one brand of each, or even a couple of brands of each. I think, and the landscape changes quickly in many industries, including solar, and some brands become a bit behind the times and others advance quickly. I wouldn't lock myself in to a particular brand in the tender, but I think you could judge the responses that come back based on that Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition scorecard. I think is very worthwhile. And I think if you talk to some independent, say, consultants in the solar field, for example, we have NHAR based in Melbourne, I think. They're not installers, and they could give, I think, third-party advice on the quality of the components. And there are quite a number of really high-quality inverter manufacturers and panel manufacturers. So yes, I would expect different contractors would come back with a variety of products.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time again, Harry. And
Thanks.
Until next time.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so moving on to Anne Fitzsimmons. Anne has been leading renewable energy and efficiency projects at Bankstown and now the merged Canterbury Bankstown Council for a number of years. She's been one of my go-to people, as is Harry, when I want to council knowledge or opinion on technology or strategies. And today she'll be talking about her experience in monitoring solar. Now, because of a technical glitch during the actual webinar recording, I, being Lucy Carew-Reid, will summarise what Anne talked about, as unfortunately her session didn't record. So when Anne first arrived at Bankstown, I think it was around 10 years ago, there were some solar panels installed, but none of them were being monitored. And when she first got there, one of her key questions was, well, what are these solar panels doing? What are they achieving? Part of the reason why there was no monitoring was that during the project install before her time, that there really was a bit of not much ownership over the project. No one really wanted to own it. So the first thing she did was she got some monitors installed on existing installations. And it was just as well because there were a couple of systems that weren't performing properly. And then from then on in, whenever she had solar powers installed on buildings, monitoring was included in the project specifications. And one of the specs around that was to ensure that the monitoring system was aligned with her existing system. Now she can see all installations in the one online monitoring portal. And this allows to check performance regularly and pick up on anything that's unusual. Another way to flag poor solar performance, one of her first steps is to just regularly review building billing data. And if for whatever reason the electricity use is going up, then that's a bit of a red flag that something's going on, which means you can just jump onto the online portal and see what's been happening. Monitoring solar like this also allows Anne to report to council whenever they request reports. And in terms of where to from here, Anne is continuing with some solar projects on roofs. This is still a very good business case, and council are committed to continuing with that. So that's great news. Anne has provided her contact details, so feel free to get in touch if you have any questions around that. Okay, and we'll just move on now to some closing remarks. So it's exciting times in council land for solar. There's lots of opportunities not only on council roofs, and I look forward to hearing what you all get up to. So just some key learnings that the presenters shared today is work out where you're going to need some external expertise and get them on board. So that might be in the project specification phase. It might be just doing some solar feasibility work, even getting a structural engineer in to make sure that your roof structure is okay. Or it might be around the commissioning phase, getting third-party assistance with proper commissioning of your solar project, which is something that Harry highlighted that they do at Moonee Valley. Just work closely with your maintenance team in getting sign off on any solar design. It's worth your weight in gold to have them involved and on board. Harry suggests to always recommend a minimum of 15-degree tilt on your solar panels, otherwise they can get very dirty. The rain won't clean them off properly. You still need to clean them, but it will certainly keep them cleaner than if they are flat. Consider how you weight a tender. Don't let it be price-driven. Don't let it be a price-driven decision. Quality and social responsibility, for example, are also major factors, particularly for such a long-term investment. Okay. Get more than one installer on a service panel in case they don't deliver an expected outcome. You have others you can turn to. And work out what kind of solar monitoring system you want and include that in your project specifications. And ensure your new system monitors are compatible with the existing system ones, or vice versa, update your existing systems. And also other council operators have suggested you try out the interface first, your monitoring interface. Some are simple and some are overly complex. So you want to make sure you're getting what you can use well. All right, well, let's put our hands together one more time for the panelists. Thank you very much for attending today, and we look forward to hearing from you.